So, National was extending a paid parental leave and Labor was promising to increase students' allowance. Students receiving an allowance would get an extra $50 a week under a Labor government, but critics say the money would be better spent elsewhere. Labor's tertiary education policy also contained a bringing forward of the implementation of its earlier announcement around student fees. Releasing the policy in Auckland this morning, Labor leader Jacinda Ardern said cost was a barrier to education and student allowance increasing would help. Our reporter Siobhan Wilson has more.
Hannah O'Byrne is studying law, politics and international relations at Victoria University. She says if Labor led the next government, its policy would make a huge difference. The money would mean she could live somewhere habitable.
I think there's a difference between having it tough and having it dangerous. Like, my friend Paul has asthma and can't come over to our house because it's too mouldy. So I think we don't really turn the heat on, so we'd still be cold, but I think being damp and sick is not just having it tough. That's a little bit inhumane.
Jacinda Ardern says students don't have enough money to study and live.
The idea that roughly $170 is going to cover your rent just isn't fair. This was a really practical decision. I think when people hear that that's what people were trying to survive on, they'll understand why we've put that extra boost in there.
Ms Ardern believes the country can afford it and it would be money well spent. She says education is a public good and everyone benefits. But the leader of the National Party, Bill English, says Labor would be taxing truck drivers more to pay for more lawyers.
I mean, there's no such thing as free tertiary policy. If they want to have a big spend on students, that's coming out of the pockets of the process workers that I met with this morning at King Salmon. It's coming out of the pockets of the checkout operators I met with last night in Auckland. That's who's paying for it, and we don't think that's fair.
Mr English says students with the highest housing costs will get a $20 a week boost through increases to the accommodation benefit from April next year. Labor has also signalled it will bring forward its policy of 3 years free training. It would be introduced in phases, 1 year's education available from next year, 2 from 2021 and 3 from 2024. Ms Ardern says the scheme is not limited to school leavers.
30% of our school leavers right now are going on to tertiary education. We've actually had higher rates than we have right now. We know cost is a barrier for all New Zealanders. We want to make sure that no matter what workplace you're in, no matter what your parents are doing, they actually do something about those fees for everyone.
The ACT leader, David Seymour, describes the policy as blatant pork barrel election bribery. He says allowing students to borrow more money while studying makes sense, but abolishing fees does not.
The taxpayer already subsidises 70 or 80% of the cost of a degree. You're asked to borrow the remaining 20 or 30% on interest-free terms. That's a pretty good deal.
Mr Seymour argues the money would be better spent elsewhere, for instance on primary and secondary schools. The Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox says Labor's policy is a good start, but could be more generous.
The universal student allowance needs to be adjusted to the cost of living. We need to reinstate the student allowance for postgrad students and write off the living cost component of student loans for those who work for 5 years here, and also free public transport. We need to remove all barriers that prevent our young people gaining tertiary qualification.
Marama Fox says students shouldn't be prohibited from receiving allowances based on their parents' income, and the current system should be reviewed immediately. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Siobhan Wilson ahau.